To me, human-centered design has to take all of that stuff into consideration, not just the utopic thing that, that if we empathy map it, they will come. We got to sit with folks and recognize, like, yeah, it's going to be challenging to give up that power.
Hello, I'm Doug Powell. Welcome to This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Throughout this season of the series, I've been speaking with leaders who have used their design superpowers in community and civic leadership roles. And in this episode, I continue that pattern in my conversation with Richard Hollant. In 1988, Richard founded Collab as a design consultancy with a focus on brand design and product launches. Over time, the firm moved from its original home in Boston to Hartford, Connecticut, and has shifted its focus from brand design to social impact work, engaging with community and cultural organizations in Hartford and across Connecticut. Collab has won awards from Print, How, and Cause Effect, among others, and Richard has been featured in Business Weekly, Communication Arts, and Fast Company. A longtime leader in AIGA, the Professional Association for Design in the U.S., Richard was appointed Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for the City of Hartford in 2017, and during the COVID pandemic was tapped by the Mayor of Hartford to lead the strategic reopening of the arts, culture, and recreation throughout that city. In 2019, Richard founded Free Center, a collection of rehabilitated community spaces providing free access to arts, culture, trauma healing, and advocacy programming in forgotten neighborhoods across Connecticut. We begin our conversation by rewinding the tape and exploring Richard's early journey toward a career in design.
I am not a formally trained designer. I didn't go to design schools. After finishing my undergrad, I did an interdisciplinary major, independent studies at BU, which is sort of like, what is it that you want to know about? And we'll guide you through figuring this out. In retrospect, a silly thing to ask of someone who's 17 years old, right? It's like, I don't know. But in trusting the process, turning over a rock to see what's underneath it has its own value regardless of what you find, as long as what you're fostering is the curiosity. And so I got my undergraduate degree in curiosity, then went off and studied film and video at the Museum School of Fine Arts in Boston. It's a school that's associated with the Museum of Fine Arts. And it was kind of like a Montessori school in a lot of ways, where you just sort of go in and it's like, yeah, you know what? I know that I'm here to study film and video, but I'm just going to go downstairs and make a sculpture today. And the whole place had that kind of vibe about it. Like the annual review is show your work. And if I didn't show any film or video that year, but was curious and engaged in a kind of conversation of learning and growth around whatever I was doing, cool, that worked in that environment. And, there was something about that kind of worked for me. I remember growing up, one of the big frustrations, certainly that my folks had, was that I was overly curious, that I would get wrapped up in a thing for 6 months and wouldn't lift my head from it, whether it's making images or making a movie or playing a guitar or, or working on this painting, that I would just get knee deep in. And they thought like, oh, this is the thing that this kid's going to be passionate about. So they build a dark room, buy a bunch of Marshall amps. And, a couple months later, I move on to something else. They would get really irritated by that. But that was my way, that was my way. Learn, take it in, and see something else and realize that the thing that I learned writing a song and what the structure of that looks like, applied to making a movie and what the structure of that looks like, and applied to taking a photograph and what that experience looks like, particularly in doing portrait work where it is relational. What I built over time is a recognition that everything is interconnected, that at the heart of it is this common design for how to connect with people. And I suppose that there was a piece of that, but then there was also, in high school at a place where you're like, where I was the smallest kid in the school, and that I was like one of very, very few, two or three black kids in a school in a town that now that I know something about politics, was particularly conservative. I was born with a tremendous amount of empathy and didn't recognize how to protect that.
You were born with that tremendous amount of empathy, or that tremendous amount of empathy was emerged or was nourished in your
Well,
childhood?
the interesting thing is I don't think it wasn't nourished at all in my childhood. That was not that I would not call that the dynamic of my upbringing. It wasn't modeled particularly well.
Mm,
And yet it's a thing that I kept wanting to go back to because it was safest for me, right? Because operating in other modes made me really uncomfortable. It made me feel lost in a lot of ways. So I hear your question about, whether that's an innate thing or it's a learned thing over time. I think that I was predisposed in certain ways
mhm,
to value empathy in my life,
mm,
through a whole bunch of conditions. And to be blunt about it, being one of a few black kids in a white town is
yeah,
isolating. And as a kid, I was always thinking that it was something about me, that there was something for me to learn about how to be more acceptable.
how do you fit in?
Yeah. And honestly, I thought that that was the problem,
Mm,
and I want to today thank Christopher Morales, who was bullying me like crazy one day when it was just the two of us in the hallway. And I turned to him and I asked him, okay, just tell me what it is about me that bugs you and I'll change it. Problem solving 101, right? At a loss for words in that moment, he's like, I don't think that anybody ever like asked me that question before. And and his response was,
you stopped the bully in his tracks.
yeah, and had him think for a minute about it, do a kind of like personal assessment. And what he came back with was your voice. And I just looked at him and was like, well, I guess this is going to continue because I can't do a whole lot about that, Christopher.
Give me another thing that I can change because I can't change that.
Hair I could deal with, but there were these shoes.
Oh,
But that was informative, right? In a lot of
yeah.
ways. And so I was forever trying to figure out ways to be seen and to be heard, always for
So,
women.
so to be seen and to be heard suggests not blending in. Did you
Right.
have an urge to kind of stand out and be distinctive and be unique?
No, that was never a goal. That was never a goal. The goal was seen and heard.
Mm,
Whether that meant that, that we see commonality or we see difference.
yeah.
Um, that's always been immaterial. The second part that I wanted to bring to that is that my life's work has been to be seen and heard, but also to see and hear. Seemed to be really it has
Mm.
always been an important thing to me.
Well, that's the empathy aspect of it. I mean, that's a very empathetic behavior.
It's all of the above, though, right? And I think that empathy gone awry is when we seek to see and hear to the detriment of being seen and heard.
Mm,
You could hide yourself in empathy. Authenticity can disappear pretty fast there, too. So could your quality to be a good consultant, right? Simple as possible, but not simpler, right?
mm,
What is the dance of sharing feedback? I feel like I have to be aware of the climate that I'm in
mm.
and the space that I'm in and the receptiveness that I'm hearing about feedback. And at the same time, I have to provide feedback. Having the patience to recognize where we are, to recognize the conditions that need to be created for more, to not take any of this personally, is a big piece of design work that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's again, a very core design behaviors there.
Yeah. But I mean, still to this day though, it's the common joke, right? Being frustrated about the client who wants a logo bigger or whatever it is, right? Make the type a little bit bigger, all of that kind of tactical stuff, the design application stuff. What I want to spend more time in is our own attitudes, how we come at the conversation. Can we step back into humility and into submission that it doesn't need to ever be 100%, that there's something in how we do relationship through the work that we do that advances the potential of the work that we do. And so I have decided that I'm no longer interested in lying about designing for my client's audience or stakeholders. The full intent of everything that we design is for the folks that we're sitting in that room with, rolling up our sleeves together, who are going to lift this up and take it out into community and do something with it. It's their armor, it's their confidence, it's their surety in how they live in this world, and the impact that they stand the opportunity to make on behalf of all of us that I'm working towards.
So that's a fundamental shift, I imagine, in the way that you have historically worked with clients and partner organizations. That shift from designing for their audience to designing for them.
Yeah.
Like how did you get there?
Well, one big thing that got me there is doing work around my own humility. There's this great line from a David Bowie song that I can't remember right now, but it essentially says that we clutch our crying children to our heaving chest, making unfulfillable promises for who can bear to be forgotten. And I think that design for me was that, it was
Unfulfillable promises.
unfulfillable promises, this need to not just be at the table, but be really important at the table. That there was all this conversation around like, but we matter, and this clutching at our importance. And
We meaning the designer, we
yeah,
matter.
yeah.
We overly matter. And you're
And
and
that's
you're
what I got
saying
to.
you're
That's what
saying
I got to.
we don't matter.
I took a drive around. My job was to hold a video camera. The person that I was driving around with's job was to keep these kids from getting shot today, even if that means that they would get shot today. How could I center myself in that narrative? That's the center of the narrative over there, not me. And so I'm looking at the street in front of me, looking at how the light is hitting buildings and feeling like, oh, look, there's a strobing past my camera. This capturing the energy, asking questions to hear what he sees and recognize that, there's some kids that are usually on this corner that aren't there. I'm watching him look left and right, super steady, like almost like a video cliche at how like intentional his looking was. It was almost like a caricature of a thing, but he was taking in every last bit of it, and every last bit of it was primal. It was about safety, it's about wondering about his own safety and where he was heading, whether he gets shot again. It was concerned about the safety of me in that vehicle while I'm like noodling around, like, oh man, I wish I had a wider lens for this moment, And he's thinking about like this passenger over here, and he's thinking about everybody that he's driving by. And I'm thinking about whether I should be shooting at a 30 or 24.
Yeah, do I have the shot?
Right? It's so like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to speak for every designer, I could speak for myself. But I think that the thing that I bring to this is what Francis Scott Key brought to the war. We're creating battle cries for foot soldiers, is what we're doing here. And if I can maintain that level of humility, that is the full scope of the work and that I could be proud of it. I stand a chance of doing right by the folks that I'm doing for. So yeah, I'm designing for them.
Yeah. Yeah. The orgs that, are in some mode of recovery from pandemic years and the disruption that caused. Are you detecting any patterns around those that are emerging in a strong, maybe even stronger place than prior, or vice versa, those that don't have the resiliency to continue?
It's an issue of leadership, and it's an issue about how the organization manages feedback and where it gets that feedback from and what it does with the feedback. If we are operating in a strong CEO organization, which is often like a founder CEO, that kind of thing.
Classic visionary founder story of many of these organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, if that founder, if part of that initial vision, if that initial vision was a me vision versus a we vision, I'm finding that the organization will falter. They're struggling. And part of the struggle is they've been getting input all along
Mhm.
about what was going on structurally and where the risks were, where the legitimate connection and alignments were existing in community and with stakeholders, and very often pushing through instead of slowing down and assessing, right? So we look at feedback versus direction, for example. Like there's a mandate, but then there's feedback. What's happening in that feedback loop that's changing how things are going on? That's sometimes the person who's sitting at the door and letting folks in and having an exchange with customers at the door is having a very different perspective to what the organization is providing and to how it's being received than someone who, for example, their role is higher up in that hierarchy and they're on the phone with donors.
Mm.
You're
Right.
getting very, very different input. You need all of it. How you weigh that input tells us a lot about what the organization is doing, right?
Yeah. This notion of feedback is a very designerly idea. I mean, that is core to our practice as designers. So part of what you're observing here is that those organizations that are most human centered
Mm.
and have that sort of capacity to listen and have built it into their way of working have a higher survival rate.
They have a much higher survival rate. And the pivot towards that takes time, right? If you're in an organization that isn't doing that naturally, it's going to take
Mm.
time to do it. So to suddenly have an aha when you're really struggling and fighting for survival, to do the massive amount of culture change that's necessary to adapt to a different feedback loop becomes really hard, right?
So an organization that does not have this in their DNA, in other words, they're built on a different model, or intentionally or not. Usually, I'm guessing not. They realize, to their credit, that hey, we've got to operate differently. We're not in touch with our customer. We're not in touch with our audience, and we need to do better with that. If I'm hearing you right, that is not a that is step one. And there are many steps that follow, and maybe there's a trap for some organizations who think, oh yeah, we'll just start listening and then we'll be different.
That's the deferment, right?
Mm.
We defer listening until pain points. Part of what the feedback loop offers us is an ability to recognize pain before it's deadly. And if human-centered design doesn't take into consideration all of humanity, which includes stubbornness, which includes a certain amount of ego and I got this. To me, human-centered design has to take all of that stuff into consideration, not just
Mm.
the utopic thing that if we empathy map it, they will come. We got to sit with folks and recognize, like, yeah, it's going to be challenging to give up that power. Rolling this back to feedback, sitting with these folks to take a look at how they take in feedback every day. Every day starts with feedback. It starts with folks sitting around and taking each other's temperatures. So where are you at? What are you experiencing on the street? What's the vibe? How's it feel? It's not necessarily even, just data feedback. It's trusting intuition, trusting, what you felt driving down a road and, whether you could feel the electricity that's percolating in ways that you can't articulate yet, but the trouble's coming. You know,
Interesting. So there's a narrative quality to the story. They're telling each other stories.
yeah.
Yeah,
And the stories are also in shorthand, right? Because everybody's sitting in that circle
sure.
trusting each other, right? So we don't have to go into detail. You could have someone saying, I don't know, I was driving down Sterling and just, I don't know, I got a feeling. And nobody questions that feeling. Nobody asks for more information than that. They respond to that. Now, if we could take that, which is the ideal feedback loop, and think about how we could institutionalize that in all of our organizations, we're onto something.
That's such such an amazing story. And how did that team, that leadership team, how did they start behaving like that? Was that something that somebody asked for or imposed on them or set some expectation that there would be this story-based feedback on a regular basis, or did that happen very naturally, organically?
I think what we have to do is unlearn the other way of doing things. I think that the natural state for the cultures that are sitting around the room, a lot of Latin culture, a lot of folks who are Black, it's Black and brown cultures sitting
Hmm.
in that room together, right?
Yeah.
There is a cultural way of approaching this. A client friend of ours refers to the African village a lot. And we talk about everything from branding down to fund development, right? And to how to run a board meeting. And the conversation keeps coming back to like, what we know is what's at the heart of the African village. So, why are we doing Robert's rules when we know when we've got consensus in the room? You could feel the agreement in the room, just move forward. This formality of how we regulate and how we datify absolutely everything ignores the truth about how we are actually genuinely connected if we trust that genuine connection. But that's a natural part of the cultures in the places that I operate, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so what happened is the organization was built to support these communities with a whole layer that sat on top of it that wasn't of that space. That isn't how we do family dinners. That wasn't how we organically operate. So I want to reframe that question, Doug, is in the space that I operate, it's largely community. Be of the community, honor the community in all its ways. And so if the community listens to the ground and trusts what's in the air, honor that.
Yeah. I mean, there's I'm imagining back to that, starting every meeting with what are you hearing or what are you seeing, that feedback loop. I'm hearing that part of that is culturally based.
Mhm.
The people around that table have that's a very natural way for them to interact, to tell each other stories and to verbalize that, as opposed to have a very formalized, rigid agenda based, format for the meeting. And yet there's also, a vulnerability that is required of whoever owns that room and whoever owns that table and that leadership team to be able to say, yeah, if I'm asking for this, I could hear something. I probably will hear something that's going to be hard, and it's going to make my day or my week really shitty, but I got to hear it, right?
Absolutely. None of this work happens without the interpersonal work, right? What I find the really good organizations invest in is time and space for doing the interpersonal problem solving, the interpersonal learning about each other. You know,
I think this is, I mean, we're talking about cultural organizations that you're interacting with and working with. And I'm also thinking about my audience here of leaders of design teams and design programs and big organizations, and how what we're talking about transfers to that or can transfer to that scenario of leading a team. A lot of these core concepts are really very transferable, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
That we're talking about. We're not talking about something that's unique only to a cultural civic organization or community organization, but it's unique to groups of people and how they function together.
absolutely. We're talking about our humanity.
Yeah. I mean, you're telling some gripping stories about people who have, influenced your work and impacted your work. Were there key people who inspired that, either that you were connected to or that were out in the world that you were aspiring toward?
Yeah, there's one person that influenced me probably the most. Her name is Jane Hudson. She and her husband Jeff ran this indie pop band, and they both taught together the video program at the museum school. Jane is this phenomenal, like interesting, quirky artist in every possible way. So in a lot of ways, I get the sense now that she might have been a kid a lot like me, who dove into everything full on. I mean, she was a musician, she did this video work, and she's a painter, and she speaks so lyrically that I'd imagine that she writes, right? And she was taking a look at the work that I was doing, and I'm a fast study, and so it had a technical quality to it, and she would just listen and listen and listen and not respond whatsoever to the craftsmanship. She'd respond to the heart, to how I was showing up, not what I was doing. And there was a day that she gave me an assignment because she wanted to strip it down, because even as a grad school student, I just would start doing big production. It's like, oh, okay, I understand how to do a light meter reading. Next thing you know, I'm using my savings to rent a bus, and we're gonna be doing this like aerial stuff. It just got to be like, Scorsese level production thing. And like with my first like 30-second project about an egg. And she was taking a look at my propensity to do things like that. And she's like, this is what I need you to do. I need you to go into this little tiny room over here with just this camera, not even a chair, just you and this camera, and come out of there with a video for me.
No bus, no helicopter.
No, no Lamborghinis, nothing. And I did this thing, right? Because I'm gonna do the assignment because that's in my wiring. It's like, oh, assignment? Oh, give it to me. I'm going to do this. And I came out and I don't remember what I had produced, to be honest with you, but I remember what she said about it. She said that for the rest of your life, your skin is gonna be your theme, and your skin in all ways. And so she just planted that. And I've gone through life paying attention to skin, paying attention to skin color, paying attention to the permeability of skin, to skin as boundary, to skin as container for self, to skin as a permeable entity, where things could get in, and mindfulness about what gets in, and this recognition that for this phase of my energy, skin is the container. So what's in it that I could see?
Wow, what a profound statement. What a gift she gave you in that moment.
It's a gift. And so I'd have to say, the biggest influence, because it's the friend she provided me with the insight for my own framework.
I'm going to go a step further with what she provided in that moment as you described it. I mean, that she saw you and she acknowledged you, I imagine, in a way that no one or very few people had done
Right.
previously. I mean, that was such an insightful comment that she made, and she needed to be just locked in, just really attentive to you in almost an intimate way. And that's powerful, especially as a young creative person, just to be maybe understood.
And I'm going to take that a step further too, Doug. Understood, yeah, but there's a thing that she understood that was profound to me, right? It's a thing that she opened up. It's the understanding of my appetite to be challenged. So it isn't just the understanding of I see you. It's that
Yeah.
I understand what makes you whole. And in a lot of ways, she reframed, and I'm recognizing this now as we're talking about, she reframed this thing that was always about curiosity for me, and reframed it as an appetite for challenge,
Yeah.
which is different, right?
Yeah, there's an edge to it. There's an ambition to it. There's a reaching,
Mhm.
but there's also the challenge suggests like an opposing force.
Yeah. And that's there. It's that skin thing,
It's
right?
skin.
But there's always an opposing force to it. The energy to keep all this stuff inside of us, it's just tremendous
Hmm.
what that mechanism is.
Hmm.
Uh, and the the barrier. It's what we were just talking about a little bit ago, right? We've got to sit with folks and recognize, the skin they're in, you know?
I hate to pull us out of this rabbit hole, but I want to talk about Free Center and
Oh yeah, okay. Same thing.
yeah, yeah. I imagine there's that we can stay in the rabbit hole and talk about Free Center because there's so much synergy and the thread just really weaves right into that, I imagine. But tell us about Free Center and do connect that thread if that's how you want to build that story.
So I was running collab with this sort of always these lovely spaces. We were never afraid of being at the edge of the universe, in those neighborhoods where things were just starting to develop. It was true in Boston. It was true when we came here to Hartford. And because of that, for a small firm, a small scrappy firm trying to figure things out, we always had like these cool places made of steel and glass and concrete, you know?
That was a requirement for many years as a
It
small
was.
design firm. You had to have a cool space.
It was. And we had like this cool modernist space that could have been a museum because we kept it that way, right? Black glass. Black glass. Like we were messing around. Black glass were cheap. And I would walk every day through the reception room that we had because we had to have one of those and realize like we're in relationship with people. Nobody comes here. And when they come in, they just walk straight to somebody's desk. We would sit in a kitchen that was used exactly 1 hour a day because folks would just heat something up and then sit at their desk, so they could keep chatting with someone who's working or, the thing was never used. We had to actually formalize. It's like, okay, this is what we're gonna do on Fridays. We're gonna like have wine and cheese and do a production meeting here. So
In the kitchen so that we
it's gonna be in the kitchen because gosh, we got to use this space for crying out loud. And we had conference rooms that were used, a couple hours a day.
yeah.
When we're not using this stuff, why isn't somebody else using it? It just seemed like, and we started, through organizations like AIGA, et cetera, talking about sustainability a lot, and we were so focused on ink and paper that I was walking into these spaces as well, going like, oh. And then a thought came to me one day. I am taking so much from this city. Look at this space that I'm using here and not using, that I'm just keeping it from access. What is my real responsibility to this moment? Why does it have to be mine? And that just was incubating. And I guess over a couple of years ago, some of my staff members, when I talked to them about Free Center, and I am getting to that, said to me like, well, you've been talking about this for as long as I've known you for like 12 years now. It's like, really? I have? It's like, yeah, all the time. You're walking around. It's like, why are we not using this space? Oh, I guess that was an external voice that I was using. So this idea that this space could be used in a community where in some ways I could feel more part of that community, less like an outsider. All of those things started like percolating. Then one day the opportunity presented itself. We were called to, because some of the work that we do in the city, we were called to this meeting that the Hartford Public Library was putting on, where they were talking about the branches that they had closed, and we were sitting in one of those branches. It was about 8,000 square feet, newly, and I'm talking about within the past 2 years, teched out with the speakers in the ceilings and remote control blackout curtains and a brand new parking lot that was repaved for 25, 30 spots, something like that. About almost 2 acres of outdoor space that was highly manicured, irrigation system built into it.
Well,
And as we
and
learned,
they were shuttering it.
boom, just like that. Because the budget was better allocated somewhere else. And there's that whole theory of cut loss, this idea of like, do you keep investing in a thing because you've already invested X? That every investment is a reset of the investment model. At what point are you at the cut loss point, right? And the city did a pretty darn good job of doing its cut loss analysis and decided like, sure, we just spent $4 million on this building, cut loss. I know it's a hard one, right? it's a hard one. But when you take a look at what continued investment would look like,
Yeah,
it would be to the detriment of the main branch.
sure.
And mind you that when we took over this space, I popped up on the roof because we were situated in a way that I was like, oh my God, outdoor spaces, roof deck, we'll look over the city. We hadn't been on the roof before, no reason to go up there, but we were daydreaming, and I popped up the roof and stepped up, and there was a field of solar panels up there that at the point of cut loss, the last thing that needed to do was literally to do the work of plugging them in because all the equipment was there. They just need the technicians to come out and finalize that piece of work. And they were at cut loss and didn't.
So you're in
So
this
in
meeting,
this
and
meeting where they're trying to figure out what's going on with their spaces, what are the opportunities of their spaces for these spaces, and they were asking the community to pitch ideas. It was very much a show me attitude. It's like, here, we showed you around, we gave you cookies. Now go back and send us a proposal of what you want to do with the space. And I was listening to some of the ideas that were being floated, ideas about annexing, using it as like some kind of storage annex, turning what was the symbol of hope in a community and the possibility of community opportunity, which a library is and talking about it in terms of like starting an opioid clinic there, which just broke my heart to think, that we strip hope out. And not saying that we don't need opioid clinics, we do. But the message to community of pulling out like a library and the research for futures and replacing it with, an opioid clinic is painful. So went back, didn't think twice about it. Certainly didn't think about applying for about putting anything in. And got a phone call from the director of the library who wanted to know why they want to talk about why she hadn't received any applications whatsoever for this thing. She's like, what do you think is going on? It's like, nobody's got time for speculation here. All of these organizations that you called in are at their limits of survival right now. And you showed up and you told them, like, sell me on an idea, put in a bunch of work, sell me on an idea. And if we like the idea, then, you were asking for spec because you weren't showing up willing to be vulnerable or talk about like what your dreams are for this city and be willing to roll up your sleeves and work with folks. It's like, oh,
yeah,
and ask me what she thinks the next step should be to reframe another request. It's like, I don't think you need to reframe another request. I think that you are the library. You know everybody in this community. That's been your job. Figure out who you want to partner with, call them up, tell them what you're bringing to the table, and ask them to dream with you. And then you're onto something. Then you're going to have something that's going to be meaningful and not going to be forced into the space. And a couple of weeks later, she called us up and she said, hey, so this is what we're bringing to the table, and we'd love to partner and dream this with you. And that was the first iteration of Free Center. It was a much bigger space than we needed. Our computers and desks and files and bookcases occupied maybe like a quarter of the space. And we shared our kitchen and our conference room and a big reception room that we never walked into, and it became community. And we opened the doors. And from day one, before we even moved in, I was walking around playing my guitar in that space, and folks started knocking on the doors. And I would let folks in one at a time because we weren't ready to do anything. And I would find that folks needed to provide information so they could keep their housing, so they had to do things like access forms that they were sent and print them out in a manner that they didn't know how to do that. So it was helps. I would put my guitar down and help somebody do that and help him print out his year's worth of pay stubs and notice that when he was making his case for housing support, he was pulling the 4 highest weeks that he had versus the 4 lowest weeks of income that he had. Because in his mind, you only want to support someone who's worthy of support, and to help him understand it's like, well, you're less likely to get support if you're making the case that you're fine and you got it covered. It's the points where you don't have it covered that they want to know about.
Mm.
And I could feel his embarrassment of putting that information forward. And I could feel the need to offer love and support and appreciation so that this person could be encouraged and reassured and validated so that he could act on his own behalf. And in a lot of ways, what Free Center is, and is an extension of that story, grounded in art and culture. It's this idea that can we help folks genuinely see themselves, hear themselves in a way that they realize that what they're asking for is human and not handout. The dignity that they carry is the dignity that they are, regardless of circumstances. So we built this thing, and then we opened another one here in Middletown. And the one in Middletown, we realized is more of a central location, and so the energy's so different and so visceral here that we're now growing that to include a sunken theater and big workshop spaces, and we're moving out of the edge of the universe in a way that's more accessible to more folks, where more collisions of different cultures can happen.
And are they primarily makers, artists? Who is inhabiting and using the space on a daily, weekly basis?
So it's been home to a political campaign. We hosted the mayoral debates. There are theater groups that practice and perform here. There have been yoga sessions. There are youth groups and stuff that happens here. It is whatever the community needs and are willing to provide open and free to the community is what takes place here. You name it. All the vibrancy of this community happens here. The hard conversation in this community happens here. There's this idea that we would therefore be anti-police, right? It's like, no, when there's a new chief of police, we invite him here to sit and talk to the community in an open and candid way.
So second location now in Middletown, and then the idea is broader expansion.
Our plan for Connecticut is to be in each of the culture hubs that all actually spin around Middletown, because Middletown is literally like kind of the middle of the state, which is right smack midway between Boston and New York as well, right? So it's middle of a lot of things. And so it becomes the spoke.
Is the Middletown location also in a former library branch?
No, completely different structure there.
Okay.
Middletown location is in this old industrial building, scrappy warehouse space that happens to have a ground floor access and is in a neighborhood. And it got pieced together over time, you know? You could see it behind me, like sheetrock still hasn't even been taped. That wasn't important. What was important is that it's white and we could hang stuff on it, you know? And we built like this like almost 2,000 square foot loft that floats over the space that runs all the way around it. So it creates a theater that looks down into the space beneath it for all kinds of stuff here.
Amazing.
It's all rooted in, you know, in what we were talking about, right? The idea that everything is permeable, that skin is a filter system where we could get rid of junk, but we could also let really, really good and necessary things in and to move between us. That's the aspiration here, you know, and that's the evolution of Collapse, and hopefully that's the evolution of me as well.
That's all for this episode of This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Special thanks to Scott Leach of Brand Speak Communications for his production assistance, and to Graham Barton for his original theme music. I'd love for you to help me grow the audience for this podcast by liking and following it on your favorite podcast platform. And I'd also love your help finding great design leaders for future episodes of the show. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with your ideas. You can find out more about my work as a design leader on my website, dougpowell.design. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.